Is Bryan Pappa Rodger? It's a valid question considering we know he admitted to being the attacker of the Idaho 4. And I got some new thoughts on this. All that being said, everything's alleged. Welcome to the point. Let's get to it.
As it turns out, Bryan Kohberger studied the manifesto of Elliot Rodger at length while he was a criminology student at DeSales University in Pennsylvania. And I know this because his classmate Josh Ferraro was there studying right alongside him. They took the same forensic psychology courses together. One of the classes, in fact, was with esteemed Professor Catherine Ramsland. And Josh made some pretty astute observations about Kohberger, and Josh is kind enough to join me now. Wow. First of all, I can't thank you enough for this interview because I, along with so many others, have been trying to get inside the head of Bryan Kohberger, and it seems like a fool's errand. It seems impossible. So anyone who may have known him or anything about him is like a gold mine. Josh, first and foremost, what was he like? What was the Bryan Kohberger you knew like?
Yeah, so let me clear something up real quick. I don't remember a single class we had together except biology. What I said was that we had, as a collective group of students, took these classes not together. I only remember biology courses. However, as a student, he was very astute, very diligent, and he was a pleasure to work with.
What do you mean you didn't call him a monster? Look, I understand he's the one who committed this crime. I've gone on and said multiple times he admitted it, he did it. But I love the fact that up front, he's correcting the situation. One of the issues with this story and one of the problems a lot of us had at the very beginning, even up to now, is that there's a lot of misinformation, there's a lot of twisting of the narrative. I understand that nobody's perfect. I'm certainly not perfect. Heck, half the time I can't even speak properly, apparently. But let's correct some of this story. Let's get back some of this trust between the people in the mainstream media. We already know y'all are selling us a bill of goods. We already know y'all twist and bend things to fit whatever agenda you're trying to push out. Bryan did it. He admitted he did it. But let's get some accuracy back into this situation.
So when you say he was a pleasure to work with, was he a pleasure to work with because you're a man? Because all of the reports say if you were female, he wanted nothing to do with you.
Yeah, I could say that would be accurate just because during class and roaming around DeSales University, I never saw him really talk to anybody. In the group project, he communicated with me via text and email, and we worked diligently on this project, him and I together with two others who really didn't do much in the project. But when it was time to communicate, he was easy to communicate and text and email and make sure the project and the portions that needed to be done were done. But in terms of his interactions with other students, the most telling thing I can say is he really kept to himself. I remember vividly many times watching him in the Starbucks in one of the buildings, and he would sit there with his computer and his headphones in and keep to himself almost all the time. In class, he would answer questions from the professor, but you never really saw him engage, interact with really anybody. Even myself in our group, we didn't have many conversations because he would shut down any kind of small talk.
So, Josh, you know, you can remember somebody for no particular reason, and you can remember someone because of something like this, and suddenly you look at your memories through a different prism. When you look back at the man you see on your screen right now, when you look back at your time with him, do you see any red flags? Do you see anything that now stands out, now makes perfect sense?
Honestly, my take on that is this. What makes this whole situation a whole lot scarier than any other normal situation is there still seems to be no connection between Bryan and the victims. Now, yes, you don't have to have a connection, and maybe not having a connection was one of the reasons he did what he did to those four individuals. But he looks like an everyday average guy. He looks like some individual who's clocking in 9 to 5 to some sort of office job, which then means somebody who's capable of a crime like this could be anybody, and it's kind of freaky when you think about it like that. Some of the scariest criminals are the individuals who you wouldn't think would be a criminal. It's kind of a hard thing to wrap our minds around. Will we ever actually understand the reason why? I don't know. I'm coming to terms with the fact that we may never actually know the reason why. Now, knowing the reason why or understanding the reason why was never going to be a part of the trial to begin with, but we always want to know motive just so we can have a better understanding of what's going on around us. I'm believing in this story more now than ever that we won't actually know a lot of these details, but an attacker like this could be anybody.
No, I can't say that I do. I mean, he was like a chameleon. I mean, for everything that's came out, some of the most heinous people look the most normal. And I'm not saying Bryan Kohberger looks normal whatsoever, but he definitely, in my aspect, doesn't raise any red flags up until this point and the past few years. But I did notice, telling things that, like how you kind of said, this prism that I'm looking through in my past, and he really kept to himself. Something interesting, he always wore long sleeves, no matter if it was hot or not. And I just remember making that distinction because that was something odd that I noticed about someone, although it bears no weight.
A lot of people are saying he wore long sleeves all the time because he had that party favor problem. That's the reason for the long sleeves. I don't know. You can let me know your thoughts down below because at the end of the day, this is just an open discussion channel.
In no meeting, and that he kept to himself almost all the time. And he was a commuter student, so he didn't spend much time on campus. He came to class and he left.
If you look back now, do you recognize anything in the patterns of the that he has now confessed to? Even though I understand, Josh, we don't have all the details, we have a fairly good idea of what he did to carry out these heinous acts. But do you recognize anything in the patterns of what he did at 1122 King Road as compared to the things that you all were being taught, the things you were learning about other terrible?
Yeah, you kind of mentioned it earlier with Elliot Rodgers, and something I'd said in a prior interview with God knows who was that in these classes, we go over many times how in the digital age, these people will try to relive that fantasy. Digital age, physical age, doesn't matter, but they're oftentimes going to go back to that crime scene. And one way to go back to the crime scene is to go to a pseudonym like Pappa Rodger and enter a community and relive that high. That is something we went over in depth and kind of, if it does come out ever that he is Pappa Rodger.
Let's go down that rabbit hole for a second. Is Bryan Pappa Rodger? I'll always be as fair as I can be when I make these videos. I have not seen anything in the court documents yet saying Bryan is Pappa Rodger. But does that mean he was never Pappa Rodger? Does that mean somebody else was Pappa Rodger? In terms of what I believe to be the two suspect theory, there is a valid argument to be made right now that Bryan was one attacker and the individual who was doing the whole Pappa Rodger thing online was the other. We know from court records that Bill Thompson came out and said that some of his internet search history has been deleted. I don't believe you can completely wipe away the connection between Bryan and Pappa Rodger if you dig deep enough. You would think that since the FBI was involved in this thing that they got an IP address and they can link who that individual was, and somebody somewhere within all these court documents says Bryan either is or isn't Pappa Rodger. Now if he's not, I would love to know who it was because it seemed like they were right more than they were wrong. But I do gotta say the resemblance between Bryan and this Pappa Rodger character is uncanny. I don't want to make the statement that they look exactly alike, but they look incredibly similar to each other. And it is quite possible Bryan was Pappa Rodger. We gotta be fair. He admitted to the crime. We know he committed the crime. Yes, you still might have the questions. We all still have the questions. But in terms of the who in the story, we know who the who is. Bryan admitted it. He was caught. It was his DNA on the sheath. And yes, the sheath is a movable object. The sheath with his DNA, along with his internet search history and purchase history, in conjunction with his admission, ties him to the crime scene. And around the time that Bryan's arrested, the Pappa Rodger thing disappears completely. I mean, those are a lot of coincidences. If we're going to be fair, we have to say, hey, that's a strange coincidence. And while I can't prove it yet, in fact, none of us can really prove much of anything beyond the fact that Bryan committed this crime and those four individuals passed away in a manner that they didn't need to pass away in, it is more likely than not that Bryan is Pappa Rodger. And if he's not Pappa Rodger, that means there's another suspect around there who's just floating around free. But the idea that there is another suspect floating around walking free doesn't necessarily add up either. I mean, self-preservation is a thing. If this was a crime that involved multiple people, then Bryan would know that the narrative surrounding this whole situation that the state's going to present is going to have holes, it's going to have issues, it's going to have doubt. And in this story where a lot of us saw reasonable doubt, he took a plea. Now, who in their right mind accepts a plea in a story they know there's issues with? I mean, if the state was of the belief that Bryan was the sole attacker and Bryan knew there was more than one attacker, he knows that the state can't prove everything in terms of a timeline. And if the timeline's off, the story's off. If the story's off, most people have reasonable doubt. I mean, all you need is one juror. And none of that was the case. So that kind of erases to a degree the whole multiple suspect situation, if I'm explaining that properly. We know that he's the attacker. We're just trying to figure everything else out. It's highly possible he is Pappa Rodger at the end of the day. That seems like the most likely scenario given how everything sort of lined out. And for me personally, if somebody else was Pappa Rodger, you would think that would be discovered already. You would think somebody out there, some internet sleuth who has some sort of ability to hack things and figure stuff out would identify whoever Pappa Rodger is. And if somebody has, I haven't seen that story.
Would say that's pretty shocking just because that's very silly to involve yourself back into the crime and leave a digital footprint instead of being physically there. But we also know that he had went back in that morning, so he might have done both.
Do you
It's
think,
incredibly stupid,
Josh, that Bryan Kohberger is Pappa Rodger who showed up in those crime discussion groups after?
Until someone else stands up and says that it was them, absolutely. I don't see any reason to say that it wasn't him. The pseudonym Pappa Rodgers in connection with Elliot Rodgers makes a lot of sense, especially if he did idolize him as, the king of the incel community and wanted to do it, even better, or pay homage to his name. And
I mean, they look exactly alike.
In the past.
Not exactly, but insanely similar.
I haven't seen anything online or anywhere that says that he isn't, or definitively that he is. So it's all speculative, of course, right now, but it would not surprise me in the slightest if, to relive that high, he entered that community just to feel everything that he felt that night again.
Pretty uncanny, the profile picture and the icon picture in the Pappa Rodger. Right? I mean, when I first saw it, I thought, well, that's a dead ringer right there, and what a stupid mistake. But then again, Bryan Kohberger made a lot of stupid mistakes if he thought he was so smart at committing the perfect crime. One last quick question for you, Josh. As a student of criminology, do you think you'll ever reach out to Bryan Kohberger to try to ask him questions or learn more about why he did what he did?
Would I?
Yeah.
No, that's not my place. I mean, you leave that to Dr. Ramsland and the professionals. I run a swim school now. I have nothing to do with criminal justice anymore. I'm very happy where I'm at. Although if given the opportunity to speak to him and just ask him why, I think anybody would take that opportunity. So I guess I would say yes on that. And there better be other people in the room because, I feel for the victims and their families, and what he did, what he admitted to, now we can finally say, is atrocious and awful. And yeah, everybody wants to ask him why, so I can't deny that I would ask him if given the opportunity, but we'll leave that to the professionals.
And he did admit to it. Look, I understand a lot of people are still trying to come to terms with all this, but he admitted to committing the crime. And I don't think it's fair or just for the victims and the community, because they don't have anything to do with Bill Thompson, for people to say he had nothing to do with it. Questioning who committed this crime is a non-starter for me. Now, questions about why Bill Thompson rushed to go to a plea deal in this situation where it seemed like there were so many holes and he was over there being so certain, and questions about the university's involvement in this situation and why some of these decisions look rushed, those are all fair game. But to make the statement Bryan didn't commit this crime, or there's some sort of mass conspiracy where Bryan's intentionally the fall guy, he's a fed, he's going to end up on a beach somewhere after all this is said and done, it's just not something I'm willing to go down on this channel. It's just not anything I've seen any evidence on. It's not anything I've seen is valid. That's not me saying I'm right and everybody else is wrong. Everybody's free to have their own opinions, and you're certainly free to have your opinions on this channel because it's an open discussion channel. But the who is answered. The only remaining questions are the questions surrounding this story, the motive, if possible. I doubt we'll ever get it, and how all this happened, that would be a good one to have answered to as well. We haven't seen any of the evidence that the state had against Bryan, and on up until this plea deal, it looked like the state was certain Bryan was the guy. And up until this plea deal, the defense was also certain that Bryan wasn't the guy, but here we are, he admitted to it. So obviously there was holes in both of these stories. That's just the way I'm seeing it. The state's only going to take a plea deal if they know there's issues with their investigation. And the defense is only going to take a plea deal if they know there's holes in their whole reasonable doubt story that they're trying to cast. But Bryan's the one who did it. We know he's the one who did it. We now know because he admitted it. That was his sheath. That's his DNA. He's the one who purchased it. He's the one who was trying to purchase another one after the crime. He drives a white Hyundai Elantra. That was a white Hyundai Elantra apparently seen on the surveillance footage. He admitted to it.
I said it was one last question. I lied. I have one more, and I'm sorry. I'm going to ask you anyway. Josh, he gave a plea. He confessed. There was no trial. There will be no penalty. What are your thoughts about that?
Yeah, I wrote a paper about penalty in college. I'm for the penalty, an eye for an eye. He took 4 lives and got to keep his. I think that's the most unjust, unfair thing. And as America, we should be able to speak out about these things and make sure that people like this, get their just desserts. And he definitely is living a cushy life for the rest of his life. I'm a prior corrections officer. Jail is not that hard. You're away from your family. You have tablets. You have TVs. You have activities. You have games. You have people that literally hand you food. He is going to live the rest of his life in infamy. And I think that that's an injustice to all the victims, all their families, no matter how they personally feel, because I know some of the families felt different. I am a proponent for an eye, especially when it's 4.
Josh Ferraro, can't thank you enough for this time. I really appreciate it.
And the whole what is the point of the plea deal conversation is something that's ongoing, because it seems like this was an open and shut case if you believed everything in the mainstream press. And if the DP is reserved for the worst of the worst, how is this individual not the worst of the worst? Now, whether you're for or against the DP, it's irrelevant. A state has laws. Those laws need to be upheld. It's the prosecutor who decides who gets it and who doesn't, not the judge. And I agree with what he said. If people are having a problem with how these prosecutors are handling these cases, they need to speak out. They need to say something. While I don't agree with everybody blowing up Judge Hippler's phone and disturbing everybody in that court, I also don't agree with him saying, y'all need to hush. This is out of my hands. Well, you need to talk to your congressman, your state representative, people within your local government. If y'all are legitimately having a problem with these prosecutors doing things the way they're doing, vote them out. I mean, 99% of these little areas have like a 5% turnout when it comes time to decide who's going to be the prosecutor. In a lot of situations, y'all make your own bed. Go vote, go change things. If you want your voices heard, go to the ballot box. And I know I've said it in the past, I'll say it one more time. Jumpsuit Pablo's done full breakdowns on what Bryan's life is going to be like behind bars from a perspective of an individual who spent 10 years in the Department of Corrections. It's certainly worth a listen. It's definitely insight we're not going to get in the mainstream press, because none of these people who are talking heads on TV have any idea what they're talking about. But as always, if you enjoy this and a more fair, open conversation, maybe check one of these videos out. Y'all be safe now.